Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti. I am MrPhotographer.com. In this video, we're going to go over all the settings that are in the setup menu of the Nikon Z6. Most of these settings also apply to the Nikon Z7. We're going to jump right into it and go to the very first setting, format memory card. That is as it says. You could use this setting to format the memory card inside of the camera. Next is save user settings. As you know, in the top left-hand side of the camera is a mode dial. On the mode dial are three user settings, U1, U2, U3. You could set up your camera in a very specific way and save those settings to any one of those three areas, U1, 2, or 3, and you could do that here. Below that is reset user settings. This is where you would reset any one of those three or all three, U1, U2, and U3, back to the factory default settings. You do that there. Next is language. Here you set the language of the camera. Of course, I have mine set to English, a language I barely speak. Below that is time, zone, and date. Right here, you could first set the time zone of the camera. I'm in, of course, the Northeast United States, so that's near Toronto. 2 hours away from Toronto where I live. So Toronto, New York, Lima, Peru, that's northeast. And you would use the left or right arrow to set the time zone. Below that is the date and time. And you could set the year, month, day, hour, minute, seconds of your camera there. The date format, I prefer year, month, day. You could also change it to month, day, year, or day, month, year. And below that, daylight savings time. If you're in an area like I am that observes daylight savings time and you're in daylight savings time, you would set that to on. And right now, we're in daylight savings time. And let me see if I could get out of here. And below that is monitor brightness, the back of the camera, the monitor. How bright do you want it? You could go from -5 to +5. Use the up and down arrows on the camera to set that. I have it, as you saw, set to 0. Next is the monitor color balance. By default, it's right in the middle there, you could see. And you'd use the arrow keys, the up, down arrow keys, left, right arrow keys, to kind of skew the monitor color balance more towards green, blue, magenta, and so on. So you could do that if you feel that your monitor, just the colors are off a little bit. I keep it right in the middle. Below that is the viewfinder brightness, and here, of course, you could set the brightness of the viewfinder. I have it set to auto, so it'll vary depending on how bright it is out, or you could do it manually. Again, they're similar to how you did the monitor. Below that is the viewfinder color balance, and here, again, is just the same as the monitor. You would set the color balance of the viewfinder in the same exact way. Next is color panel brightness. On the top of the screen, of course, is that little LCD. That's the control panel. And I have it set to auto, so its brightness is governed by how bright it is out, how much light is coming through the lens specifically. You could do that manually. You could set it here, and you could go anywhere, any number from 1 to 7. So as you go to 7, it gets brighter. As you go down towards 1, it gets dimmer. By default, I think it's on 4, but I have it again set to auto. Or you could have that off. If you have it set to off, that little LCD on the top of your camera will always be off. Next is limit monitor mode selection. You'll notice that's dimmed out on my display. The reason why it's dimmed out is because I'm recording this video via the HDMI port. And because I have something plugged into the HDMI port, this function, limit monitor mode selection, is dimmed out. So I'm going to do my best to try to explain to you what limit monitor mode selection is. As you know, on the side of the camera, near the viewfinder below the hot shoes, there's a little button there on the left-hand side. That button is your monitor mode button. And every time you press that, you're going to cycle through one of 4 different settings. Automatic display switch, that means if your eye is up to the viewfinder, monitor on the back will turn off and the viewfinder turns on. If you take your face away from the camera, the viewfinder turns off and the monitor turns on. Below, next is viewfinder only. Obviously, that's only the viewfinder. Next is monitor only the monitor. And last is prioritize viewfinder. That means that the viewfinder mainly is on. The monitor is always off unless you're doing a menu option. Then the monitor turns on. If you find you're not using any of those, what you would do is you would go to Limit Monitor Mode Selection. When you go into that menu, you'll see that those 4 choices are there with checkboxes next to them. Remove a check mark from one of those, the one you don't use or more than one you don't use, and then it won't cycle through them every time you hit that button on the side of the viewfinder. Hopefully that made sense. Information display. When you do an information like display, sometimes lighting conditions are you can't read it. Do you want it dark on light by default, or do you want it light on dark? Auto fine tune or AF fine tune. Sometimes some lenses may not focus quite right. They'll either front focus or back focus. And you could tweak it a little bit here, and the camera will remember the lens. So every time you put that lens on, your tweak value will be used and will then focus hopefully better. So you could first of all set this on or off. Then in the save value, this is where you really tweak the focus. Right now I have the 24-70 f4 lens on. Well, if this lens were front focusing a little bit, I would use the up arrow key and try to push focus back so it's further away. So you'd have to experiment with this. If it's back focusing, then I would go the other way. So you'd have to experiment with it and set it to what you think would work best. Then by default, if the camera always seems to be not focusing quite right, with every lens, you could change the default value for the focus here. So then every lens will be either compensated one way or the other. So as you can see, I don't use that. All my lenses seem to focus fine. Below that is non-CPU lens data. If you're using a non-CPU lens, for certain functions, the camera will need to know what the maximum aperture of the lens is and what the focal length of the lens is. If you're using matrix metering, it has to know the maximum aperture of the lens so it could properly evaluate the light coming through that lens. Here you would set this, first of all, you'd give that lens a number. So if you have more than one non-CPU lens, you could then designate them a number, so then you could come in here and make sure you choose the correct lens. And here you first choose the focal length of the lens. Is it a 24 millimeter lens or whatever? You would put that there. Secondly, the maximum aperture. The maximum aperture is, again, that's for matrix metering. And again, this is also for if you're using TTL flash. So the camera knows what the maximum aperture and focal length of the lens is, so that it will be able to tell the flash the correct power to output to expose your subject. Cling image sensor. Right now you could just cling it right now, and if you choose this option, what it will do, it will go into this clinging mode. It will take a few seconds. It puts a negative charge on the sensor and gives it a little bit of a shake, and hopefully will knock any sensor dust off. When it's done, it will say done. And again, I mentioned it will take a few seconds. There it says done. And then it will return back to the menu. The other option is automatic cleaning. I have this set to clean at shutdown. So every time I turn the camera off, it will clean the sensor. You could turn that off if you don't want it to do that. Next is image dust off reference photo. This really is only applicable if you're using the Nikon software to process your images. What this does is it will allow you to take a reference photo and allow you to designate where the dust is, or it figures out where the dust is. And then when you process any image in the Nikon software, it will know that there's like a sensor spot there and hopefully will take care of it. So you could just do the start here or clean it first, then go into the start to create your reference photo. Next is image comment. Every time you take an image, do you want a comment added to that image? You can see I have it set to off. If you did want to use this, you would put what comment you want to use here and then have it attached. Copyright info. You can see I have that set to on. So I have it set to both put my name in the artist section of the metadata and the copyright section of the metadata. Next are beep options. I have mine set to off, but if you want those on, there's two different options. You could have it set to on, so it beeps When you touch the display, it beeps when it focuses, stuff like that. If you have it set to off touch controls only, then it will only beep when you're touching the back display and won't beep other times. I have it, as you can see, set to off all the time. Then if you do have it beeping, you could control the volume of the beep, 1, 2, or 3, or the pitch of the beep, low or high. Next are touch controls on the back of the camera. Do you want to enable the touch controls? 3 choices again. You could have it so that the screen on the back, the monitor, no touch controls at all, or only when you're in playback mode, only when you're looking at your images, or in my case, enable. I'm always using the touch controls. Full frame playback flicks. When you're in full frame playback mode, do you want to flick left to right or right to left? You could choose that there. Next is the HDMI port on the back of the camera, the settings you have for that. First of all, the output resolution. You could go to any of the output resolutions that are available for the camera. I have it set to 2160. You'll also set it to auto. Some of these advanced settings, the output range, I have it set to full. You could set it to limited range or again auto. External recording control. Whatever you're plugging that HDMI cord into, some of those products could control the recording of the camera through that piece of equipment. I have it set to on because I do use a specific type of gimbal, and the gimbal could control the recording of the camera. So obviously you could turn that off if you'd like. The output data depth, 8-bit or 10-bit. I have it set to 8-bit. 10-bit will give you a picture with more dynamic range, but you do have some limitations on resolution when you have it set to that. And when you have it set to that, you'll have some N-Log settings you could use and view assist setting that you could see are grayed out in 8-bit. Also, it's my understanding that Nikon's going to be releasing a firmware update that's going to enhance a lot of this HDMI output. So this is subject to change when that new firmware comes out. Next is location data. If you're using SnapBridge or you have an external GPS thing on your camera, plugged into your camera, so you're getting location data, you could have it so that if your camera goes into standby mode, put this to this is kind of counterintuitive in my opinion. When your camera goes into standby mode, if you have this on disabled like I do, what will happen is your camera will always be exchanging exposure information with the GPS set, your SnapBridge basically. And if you have it set to enable, it will save on your battery. So it will stop when your camera goes into standby mode. It will stop exchanging that data with SnapBridge. Then, as you can see, because I'm not using location data, that position is grayed out. Also, set the clock from the satellite. You could have that set on, so it's going to set the clock in the camera to the satellite, which gives you probably a more accurate time. Wireless remote options is grayed out because I don't use a wireless remote, don't have one plugged in, so I'm sorry about that. Assign remote wireless remote function button. If you're using a Nikon wireless remote, it's going to have a function button on it, and you could set that function button. So you could go right here and set it to RAW plus NF RAW if you want. I'm going to set it to none. Airplane mode, I have it set to on. If you have it in airplane mode, then it's basically Bluetooth and Wi-Fi are turned off, and you'll save on your battery power. So that's why I have it set to on. If you come out of airplane mode, then it's Wi-Fi and Bluetooth will be on, and it tends to use a little more battery. Could use a little more battery if you accidentally have those set to a setting where they're always searching for your phone or always searching for the Wi-Fi. Connect to smart device. This is, again, to connect to your phone, basically, in SnapBridge. I'm not a big fan of SnapBridge, although they've improved it a lot over when it first came out and I tried using it and never really worked correctly for me. So I'm probably going to revisit this. There's a lot of videos on SnapBridge, so I'm going to kind of gloss over this. If you're really interested in connecting your camera to your phone, I'd say watch one of those videos. Comment below if you want me to really get into it in a future video, I will. Connect to PC, that's Wi-Fi basically. So that's a way you could connect the camera to your computer via Wi-Fi. Wireless transmitter, which I don't have, that's grayed out, so I'm sorry about that. Conformity marking is just this little indicator telling you what they conform to for different, I guess, areas of the world. Battery info, right here you could get some detailed information about your battery. You can see right now I'm at 77% charge. I haven't taken any photos since my last charge, and it's a pretty new battery. You can see it's at 0. As the battery ages, it'll move towards 4. Next is slot empty release lock. If I do not have a memory card in the camera, I have it set to not allowing me to trip the shutter. So if you have it set to OK, that means you may not have a memory card in your camera, but you're going to be snapping away taking pictures. And you may think you're fine, but you're not. The pictures aren't being saved because you don't have a memory card in there. So that's why I set mine to lock. I don't want to make the mistake, even though it tries to warn you don't have a memory card in the camera. I don't want to make the mistake of trying to take images without a memory card in there. Save load settings. Once you have your camera all set up, you could save those settings to the memory card. That way, if you reset the camera for some reason, or if you have a second Z6, you could just take the memory card out of this camera, put it in the second camera, then load the settings into that camera, and that way you'll have the cameras set up identically to one another. So that's something I suggest you do, just so you have the settings saved. If anything happens, you don't have to go through and set everything up again. You could just load the settings from the memory card. Next is to reset all settings. So you could reset everything back to the default, factory defaults. It will not set the language and it will not reset the time, from my understanding. I've never done it. Next is the firmware version. If you just click right here, you'll see the firmware version of the camera and the lens. So if there is a firmware update, you can verify that the firmware update is in fact new, because this will show you what you're currently running under. And that's everything in the setup menu. In our next video, I think we'll probably go to the movie shooting menu. We'll jump up to the movie shooting menu and go over all those settings there. Thank you, everyone that watches my videos. I truly do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.